Welcome to the Clinical Echo, an online community for clinicians working in palliative care across the UK, run jointly between Hospice UK and the Association of Palliative Medicine. We hope you'll find the talks and discussions helpful and useful in your clinical practice. We're indebted to our speakers and participants who each month bring their experience and knowledge to our community of practice. The views expressed by participants in the Echo may not represent the agreed positions taken by the APM or Hospice UK on matters where opinions are divided. Indeed, the positions taken by Hospice UK and the APM may also differ in certain areas. The organisational positions in such matters are made clear on their respective websites. Project Echo methodology provides a safe space to share, listen, and learn from others across our clinical community. Thank you for your participation. We're really glad that you've come to join us in this week of bank holiday, and it just wouldn't be the same without you. We hope that you'll really enjoy today's Echo. It's full on, and we'll participate fully in the Echo through the chat box. Today, we're focusing in on uncertainty, choice, and free will in palliative care. We're very fortunate to have speakers with a lot of experience and a lot of palliative care background. Matt is going to be taking us through his understanding of the literature in relation to choice and free will in the presence of constant uncertainty. Then Kate will be focusing in on a paper relating to the uncertainties around delivering palliative care in a prison environment, and we'll be bringing her Kate depth to that. Some of you will remember Ariel from the APM conference in Edinburgh last year, and she will be talking about the need to palliate uncertainty, informed by her PhD studies on uncertainty in Oxford. And if you want to learn a little bit more about Ariel, have a little look on YouTube under Ariel Dempsey. Dr. Robert Twycross, as the father figure of palliative medicine research, working alongside Cicely Saunders at the beginning of our specialty, holds a unique place in the history of our movement. And it's a huge honor to have him speaking in the Echo today about the current legal uncertainties palliative medicine is facing. We finish up today in this week of Dying Matters, hearing from Chris White from Hospice UK on some of the events during this week of national focus. As ever, we need to remind you that this will be turned into a podcast, and that podcast can be accessed through most of the major platforms. I encourage you to please add your comments, your insights, your wisdom through the chat box. In Echoland, everyone is a teacher, everyone is a learner. In choosing the topic today, uncertainty, choice, and free will, we're really conscious of just the fact that we're all living with uncertainty in so many different ways in our lives, and particularly in palliative care. The certainty of uncertainty enters into our conversations with patients on a daily basis, preparing patients and families for uncertainty and brokering decisions in the face of uncertainty are part and parcel of what we do on a daily basis. Uncertainty management is very much part of working in palliative care. And yet our society hankers for certainty. This paper by Catherine Clare, looking at dying amongst doctors and the experience of families going through deaths of a doctor relative, highlights that even in these deaths of doctors, people who really should know more than most, uncertainty is a constant. The paper concludes, normalizing uncertainty in medical training may aid in addressing the stress of uncertainty at the end of life, even for our own medical deaths. Matt, You have been looking at uncertainty and choice for a wide range of resources. What have you found?
Well, yeah, thank you, Max. I want to start with a disclaimer, and I know I've spoken about things I'm completely unqualified to speak about before, but this is even more so than usual. So please bear with me. It's a bit Marmite, it's a bit out of depth, but Echo never to shy away from the issues of the day. Why not talk about uncertainty, choice, and free will? So that's where we're going to go. So Max. Next slide, please. Um, you all know, and I'm going to come to this at the end, the four principles of medical ethics, Beauchamp and Childress, the geniuses of those pillars there. It's actually respect for autonomy. I know that, beneficence, non-maleficence, justice. What we're going to talk about specifically is the autonomy, the choice aspect. And I want to acknowledge it came really from Kant and Mill, and it was based on that you had value, you had worth, and therefore your choice also had value and worth. And I want to apply that to, well, to everything, because although it doesn't seem like it's important at first, it is fundamental to pretty much everything we do within palliative care, as you probably realize. So, do we have free will? Do we have freedom of action and moral responsibility? Well, some people, more modern, Sam Harris, but previously B.F. Skinner, they would say no, that choice is an illusion, that free will is not really there. It is the manifestation of a clockwork world. The neurons, the electrical signals, the chemicals, if you had enough information, you understand the mechanisms, you could predict exactly what was going to happen. It is all just a spontaneous manifestation of what we've got. They say we don't really have choice, that everything is predestined. They would say that if you've got a big enough computer, such as in the Hitchhiker's Guide, you could predict every single action from the Big Bang through the creation of the universe, through evolution, through you right now, and all the situation. Because it's all been predictable, you can just follow it through, and you could predict everything absolutely. Now, the proponents who say there isn't choice, they would refer to evidence such as the hungry judge effect. This is two papers, but they're very, very interesting. One of them, one was Israel, one was New England, in which they measured how judges, as they lead up to lunchtime, were less likely to give more generous probation and closer to home time as well. So they were more generous at the beginning of the day and just after lunch. And this is statistically plays out. It does statistically. But then what's really interesting is when you actually ask the the judges, you ask the judges what was going on, then they would superimpose logic upon that. So they would say, no, this particular case was, I made this decision because of this. So are they superimposing logic upon an unconscious bias? And that is what they kind of proposed. Now that has some elements of other papers, which suggest that there is a delay between the subconscious and the conscious. That actually decisions are made unconsciously, preemptively of a conscious decision. And I haven't read all those, I'll be honest with you, but that is the message which is being portrayed through the abstracts and whatnot. And now the counter view to that would be someone like Bishop Berkeley, and he's a bit obscure. I don't know if you've heard of him specifically, but you may have heard his saying: if a tree falls in a forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? Now, he would say if there isn't anyone there to hear it, it wouldn't make a sound. He linked perception to actuality, that you have to perceive something to hear it. And you're wondering where on earth I'm going with this. He would say that if you were in a box with headphones on and blindfolded and sensory deprived in every way, you couldn't perceive the world around you. The world around you would not exist. That's his. Now he has a caveat in that he's a bishop, Bishop Berkeley. He would say that God is perceiving everything, and therefore it would make a sound because God's there to hear it. But taking that frame of thought, is perception linked to reality? Well, more modern science, and please forgive me here, I'm not a physicist or anything like that, but the more modern science in terms of quantum is kind of saying, well, actually, that might be true. Now, please don't, if you're good at physics, I apologize, but my understanding is a double slit experiment in that when you send a photon through to it, you can't differentiate between a wave or a photon unless you measure it. And that's the basis of Schrodinger's cat, in which this poison, I think it's radioactive poison, is in a quantum state of flux until you open the box, until you measure what has happened. The cat is both dead and alive. If you measure the photon, it's both a wave and a particle, and it's the looking at it which decides what it is. And this created the whole Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which goes back to uncertainty. So they would say even a computer the size of the universe can't predict everything. And the modern Netflix series, the Three Body Problem, is of a similar vein. If you've got three celestial bodies, you cannot actually predict their gravitational rotation, a bit like a double pendulum, because it's just too, it's chaos theory. There isn't a way, and thus you can't predict. The big enough computer will not be able to predict everything. Thus, there is a element of chaos, which potentially means that free will and choice is real. From the other side of the argument, from a purely materialistic, if you like. Yet, in practical life, that's all kind of academic. Choice is fundamental to our society. We base everything upon it. We base all the laws. There's no point having laws, no point in prisons. There's no point having all our anything if there isn't a basis of free will. We punish people if they do wrong, etc., etc. So, well, I guess, yeah, they're the two sides, if you like, in terms of choice. Now, legally, and I'm looking at medical informed decision-making autonomy, individual autonomy here. It's actually started in America rather than with ourselves, which is, well, thank you, Ariel. But it's 1905 is when it really started. So where there's a series of cases here. Anesthetized the defendant, physician changed the plan of surgery from right ear to left. In Illinois, they decide to file a suit of surgery against Battery because they did a hysterectomy without consent. All of these are various operations which the patient themselves didn't consent to, and the parameters of that operation were changed. And that formed the basis through the Senate in America of individual autonomy. Now, in Britain, in the UK, we were far later. We were 1989, in which there was a case of a sterilization of an adult woman with learning disabilities, and that went to the House of Lords, and then the House of Lords made a judgment, following on from the judgment, a law: doctors may operate on patients incapable of giving consent so long as the operation is carried out to save life, ensure improvement, or prevent physical and mental deterioration. Now that was expanded to our friend Ilora Finlay, and she created the capacity and consent legislation in 2005, and that's been replicated the world over in various ways and it's a basis of power of attorney, basis for all our advanced care planning. It's really the more modern way of looking at choice within medicine. So there's a young picture of Ilora. Next slide, Max. So individual autonomy, consent and capacity has a legal presence in the context of medicine in the UK law since 2005. Right. However, individual autonomy isn't the king in most of the rest of the world. And we learned that last month when we looked at all there was 5 or 6 even presentations in the PCC, all saying the same thing, that actually the wider consensus is group autonomy, family autonomy, a community autonomy, rather than a individual autonomy. And this is really important. So because rather than everything being lumped on one particular person is your decision, it becomes a family decision. And in some ways it takes a lot of weight off. Now there's problems with that, and we're very sensitive to coercion and things like that. But actually most of the world operate on this sort of more group autonomy. And I just wanted to pick out one slide on next slide, Max, in terms of the difference within the philosophies here. Western philosophy, self, focusing on individual autonomy and identity. However, Eastern philosophy, focusing on relationships and interconnectiveness. I think that summarizes it really, really well. Anyway, slightly off track. If we are weighing individual autonomy as the king of the principles, if you like, what do we balance that with? Because that's what we set as the highest principle, as it were. How do we? I would suggest it is if your individual autonomy affects other people. And infringes on other people's things. And this isn't a new view. This is of quite a wide view, that individual autonomy is balanced really against social responsibility, societal safeguarding, societal harm, protecting, all those things saying the same thing, which are we're balancing that individual autonomy against society. 2 examples very quickly. For example, you can't open a plane door at 10,000 feet. You're not allowed to. Why? Because it would suck everyone else out. Even if you wanted, you can't choose to open that door because it affects everyone else on the plane. And all our laws, in fact, but I picked 30 miles per hour speed limit. If you've got driving 30 miles per hour speed limit, you could choose to go 100, but there's consequences to it. Why do we have 30 miles per hour? Because it's a balance of individual autonomy versus societal safety. If you drive 100 down a pedestrian street, you're risking all the pedestrians. So there's a balance of individual autonomy versus societal safety. And the genius of Beauchamp and Childress, I wanted to explore, and I hate to critique, but I'm going to critique very lightly. They are geniuses. Do not take this as not principles not worth its weight. It's really useful. It has to be used. But what is this reflected in principlism? In justice? No, it's not. Their definition of justice is distributive justice refers to the fair, equitable, and appropriate distribution of healthcare. So it's not balanced against societal safety. In fact, their whole model is individualistic based. It's looking at the individual patient, and their whole model needs to be balanced against societal safety. I noticed I'm saying balance. I know it's infringement within the principles themselves, but I'm saying the whole model of principalism, it should be balanced against societal safety. And here's a gentle critique on modern society, I guess. Oh, go back one, Max, sorry. The respect for autonomy has become corrupted to autonomy in people's mind. Autonomy is king of the principles. The whole model of principlism is an individual patient model and takes limited amount of social risks. And then I do take, and I can critique those other things later, but please think about the whole model. Sorry, and Heraclitus, we've got lots to do today. Heraclitus is a Greek philosopher. Here he is standing by the Euphrates or the Lagan, who knows. And he is a guy who said you can never dip your toe in the same river twice. What on earth does he mean by that? Well, he means that the river Max Watson, the river Matt Doré, if when I was 5 years old, I'm dipping my toe in the river, I'm making a choice. But then when I take my toe out, I'm still the same river, but the body of water has moved on. I'm now 12 years old and I'm dipping my toe in the river. So it's when I make decisions, I'm the same river, but I'm a different body of water, and I make different decisions. I make different decisions when I was 5 to when I was a cantankerous teenager, to a young adult, to this older adult. And this is important, I will make different decisions in the future, i.e., there is an element of a time, he called it flux, in which I'm a different body of water. It affects advanced care planning, it affects choice, and it also is really important because we change our mind. And this is demonstrated in various different studies. But it's also shown that when we get bad news, we have a 6 month to 2 year going back to normal in 2 years. We have there's good evidence from psychometric tests in the American military. When they lost a limb, they get depressed and they come back to exactly the same level. Whether depressed before or not, it's exactly the same level over a period up to 2 years. So time, our mind changes, and that's important to recognize. Right. Max, I think that brings us to the very conclusion. There is nothing permanent except change, i.e., there is uncertainty. So there's my spiel.
Thank you very much indeed, Matt, and thank you for covering that and opening up the whole area of choice and free will and uncertainty. We're going to explore it now from two different perspectives of uncertainty. We're going to talk about palliative uncertainty with Ariel, and uncertainty in terms of the legal changes with Dr. Twycross. But before then, we're going to move to Kate. Kate, have you got a paper for us?
I have for you, Max, and thank you very much. And good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted that you can all join us this afternoon. So along the lines of thinking about autonomy and choice, I chose a paper this month that's just been published in Palliative Medicine, which is a scoping review undertaken by a team at Bristol, looking at people in prison and how they can access palliative care, and actually how much their autonomy and choice is very much influenced by the nature of their incarceration and also the models of palliative care that might be available to them. And if you recall, some months ago now, we had Mary Turner talking about prison care and palliative care, prison and palliative care on this very echo. So it's an open access publication, and there's a link to it there. And we've talked before, thank you, Max, the next slide, about the ageing prison population. And it's an ageing prison population that also has complex health needs. And some of this is kind of retrospective sentencing of people who are, particularly people who have committed sex offences and a bit now being brought to justice. But actually, an ageing prison population means that palliative care for people who are in prison is seen as increasingly important. Dedicated palliative care provision in prisons is becoming more pressing as with this ageing population. But actually, what we are aware of is there's a marked variability in the types and models of care. This review particularly looked at high income countries, but actually there's differences, and it means a meaningful comparison actually. How and what is the best type of practice for palliative care in prisons is quite challenging to undertake. So the authors undertook a scoping review. So a scoping review is a form of literature review, and it's a really good form of literature review for finding out kind of what do we know about. It's different to a systematic review, which has a slightly different methodology, but does look quite systematically at the literature, but brings it together in a different way. So scoping review, it looked at both published and unpublished, or what we might call grey literature. You can see there the databases that they searched. There was Medline, there was Embase, Synon, and PsycInfo, and Social Science Citation Index, which we might also know as SSCI. And over a period of 23 years, and the justification for that is actually to be most up to date around prison policies. They did undertake quality appraisals, which don't always do in a scoping review, but it's good practice. And they used a particular tool for that called mixed methods appraisal tool. That's because the types of studies that were included in the review were of different types of methods. And then they used what was called a narrative synthesis approach to pull the evidence together and looked at identifying a typology of models of palliative care in prison, which we'll come on to look at, and looked at some of the outcomes, facilitators and challenges. that were identified in those pieces of research and the grey literature as well. So what did they find? Thanks, Max. So 22 peer-reviewed studies were identified, and they were research studies, and you can see the mixed nature of the studies there. The 15 were qualitative studies, 6 mixed methods, and 1 was a quantitative study. The mixed methods ones are a mixing of quantitative and qualitative research. And you can see that predominantly the studies were conducted in the USA. There was 13 studies of the 22, 5 came from the UK, and then there were individual studies from Canada, France, and Australia. And undertaking that quality appraisal of the studies, they found that the study quality was mixed. They didn't discount any studies on grounds of quality, but there was some high quality and some lower quality. And they were interested in the kind of participants were people who were in prison, their families, carers, staff, and volunteers who'd had experience of palliative care for people in prison. And they were the studies were interested in the reporting mechanisms and models of palliative healthcare in prisons, and including the perspectives of people in prison, their families, carers, staff, and volunteers. And then the sources of grey literature you can see linked there, and there's various. So Hospice UK, as you'll be aware, put out a report a couple of years ago on dying behind bars, Marie Curie, National Prison Hospice Association, so a variety of sources of grey literature. And that helped shape actually how they did the typology, which we'll come on to next. Thanks, Max. Next slide. Thank you. So 3 main models of care were identified across the literature. And it's quite a long paper, so I've kind of very much shortened it here. But under each of these models of care, so there's the first one being the embedded hospice model, they've outlined for each one aspects around psychosocial support, social care, rights of family, bereavement support, and the funding implications for each of these particular models. So if you're interested in this, and if you're interested in your organisation being involved in providing palliative care in prisons, then please do have a more detailed look at the paper. So the first model of care is the embedded hospice model. And this was predominantly in the USA, and it was typified by a form of interdisciplinary team, which they call an IDT, and volunteer caregivers providing on-site care within the prison. And you can see there some of the members of the interdisciplinary team that were there, and that also included medics and nurses. And what's quite relatively unique, but happens in some prisons in England, is that inmate caregivers do an awful lot of the work and actually provide psychoeducation about dying, promoting family reconciliation. But the role of the inmate caregivers is quite a big component of the embedded hospice model in the USA. The outsourcing care model, there was only a small number of papers where this featured. There was 13 papers that the embedded hospice model featured in. It's a much smaller component. And this is where, pretty much as it says, outsourcing of care, so end-of-life care, is provided outside of prison. There are some exceptions found. The European Association of Palliative Care did a survey in 2021, which looked at a number of European countries, and within that found slightly different instances of the outsourcing of care. And in England and Wales, there are some instances of palliative care suites, although they are in the minority. Where they are there, they're working well, it has to be said. And then finally, into the next slide, please, Max. The collaborative community model is one that's much more familiar in Scotland and England. And this may be where your services, if you are engaged with providing support for prisoners with palliative care needs, involves prisons engaging with other healthcare facilities or practitioners. And this is around people sometimes coming in to assist patients, but equally prisoners being taken out of prison to outside appointments. A lot of multidisciplinary collaboration, and often with local palliative care specialists as well. And what we've started to see within the collaborative community model is what I was talking about from the USA model, is this growing number of inmates that are trained as buddies to support fellow people in prison. So in conclusion, and is a rapid oversight, there's real potential benefits for patients and prisons within the embedded hospice model, and there's a lot of detail around that in the paper. There were some concerns around the outsourcing of care may miss opportunities for comprehensive care. And collaborative care relies very much on kind of proactive prison community relationships, and often driven from the prison themselves, that could be more formalised for improvement. There was less evidence around psychosocial and bereavement needs of those people dying in prison and their caregivers. We need more research around that. And also they looked at costs and cost effectiveness, and also the impact of compassionate release on prison hospices, and how much, if there's good in-reach or good palliative care provision in a prison, how much compassionate release is required. And all of that requires some further research. So it does really depend on kind of how the application policies regarding early release on compassionate grounds, which isn't that common, certainly in English prisons. And actually there was additional challenges associated that in that one paper that they talked about from Canada, where medical assistance in dying is legal. And they found that that really impacted on whether there was compassionate release, because there was concern that that may then lead to MAID. So some complexities around there, but actually thinking about this broader sense of autonomy and choice, and actually how do we care for people who are in prison, who are requiring palliative and end-of-life care needs, which, as I say, is a rising population. And Jonathan, I've just seen your comment there that care must reach the hidden places, and often it does not. And so we do have a responsibility to look at this further. So thank you, Max.
Kate, thank you very much indeed. It's just, I think that reminder that people are punished by being removed from society. They're not punished by having determined that they're going to have really poor quality end of life care. So and yet within that system, in what sense really is there choice often? So really interesting paper for those of us who've been involved a little bit in end-of-life care in prisons, just to have it set out like that. And maybe for hospices who are thinking about this, I think it's a really good foundational paper just to have a little think about the models. Is that right, Kate?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. We move on, and we're moving on to Ariel Dempsey. And Ariel, it's great to have you with us. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. Over to you.
Thank you, Max. So hello, everyone. It's wonderful to join you today. I'm so excited to be here and share with you some ideas from my PhD called Palliating Uncertainty. From this perspective, uncertainty isn't just something to fix with more knowledge and technology, but something to palliate, alleviate the suffering of, and live with. I'm going to start by playing a video from the university where I did my pre-medical studies, and it illustrates well some of the ways we deal with uncertainty in medicine.
People want cures, an end to every disease. And so we explore, we look further, we advance and iterate and wrestle the unknown until something new emerges. People want hope. So we train and teach and question, empowering generations of the inquisitive, the caring, and the courageous. People want certainty. So we collaborate and innovate and boldly fight for them and with them, using every tool and technology within our reach. People want to come to one place and know they can find an answer. That's what they want. Cures, hope, certainty. They want Michigan answers.
So, message of Michigan Answers is that uncertainty is something to fight, and something must be wrong if uncertainty is surrounding you. Knowledge, technology, and science will save us from uncertainty, and we can promise answers and guarantee. We have a lot of myths in medicine. One is about science, that science gives us certainty. What is the actual experience? Patients with life-defining illnesses turn to doctors and medicine looking for answers, and instead find a messy, tangled world of conflicting voices, unknown causes, and indeterminate futures. Medicine's uncertain for doctors, too. Dr. David Eddy writes, "Uncertainty creeps into medical practice through every pore, whether a physician is divining a disease, making a diagnosis, selecting a procedure, observing outcomes, assessing probabilities, assigning preferences, or putting it all together. He's walking on very slippery terrain." It is difficult for non-physicians and for many physicians to appreciate how complex these tasks are, how poorly we understand them, and how easy it is for honest people to come to different conclusions. We spend a lot of time in palliative care talking about doses of opiates and pregabalins and how to help patients and their families find meaning at the end of life. But we don't talk about uncertainty and the ways we deal with it. In fact, studies show that in medicine, uncertainty is dealt with rather poorly through over-treatment, over-investigation, and over-medicalization. Attempts to cure uncertainty through our clinical exams, tests, treatments, research. This knowledge does not come without its costs for our patients and the medical system. Palliative care is a specialty with a goal of alleviating suffering, and much suffering is caused by medical uncertainty, and especially by the ways we deal with it. So I don't have Michigan answers for you today. I'm actually here to speak about a philosophy of uncertainty from William James. James was a 19th century medical doctor who was the father of modern psychology and the father of a philosophy called American pragmatism. In my PhD, I study his pragmatism and what it can teach us about uncertainty, how we can better deal with it, how we can help our patients deal with it, how we can learn to accept it and even live with it ourselves. James' philosophy is almost the opposite of Michigan answers. He argues that certainty cannot be promised, as life is a risk of faith, in his words, built on a slope of maybes. Knowledge is not the solution to uncertainty, but action in faith. Uncertainty isn't always something to fight, but perhaps can even be part of what makes life meaningful as we live into life's mystery. James wrote the first great work of psychology, Principles of Psychology, huge book. A big idea in Principles is that of attention. When our attention is on one aspect of experience, it can blind us to other things. And in some ways, this is terrifying because no matter what we look at, there's always an uncertain fringe, a more that escapes our grasp. But in some ways, this is also a source of hope. When we feel trapped and don't know what to do, sometimes changing our attention can open up new possibilities. If I had to summarize James' pragmatism in a single sentence, I would call it a turn in attention. Over and over in James' philosophy, he responds to uncertainty by turning to action, turning attention from the uncertainty and towards what we can actually do. His pragmatism is a philosophy for those who find themselves thrust right into the thick of things, who have to act and make decisions before all the evidence is in, and without the guarantee they'll be right. As physicians, we've all been there. So often in medicine, we wish we could have clear evidence and answers and guarantee before we act. But often you just don't have that luxury. James challenges the idea that we have to wait for evidence and certainty before action, and suggests that often it's the other way around. Let me give an example. So, you know Google Maps? Sometimes the direction arrow does this really annoying thing where it just starts spinning. And the arrow is spinning and you don't know what direction you're supposed to go or even what direction you're facing. And if you just stood there waiting to know for certain what direction to go before you took a step, you'd never move. The only way to fix the arrow is to just start walking. You may not walk the right way, but at the very least, the arrow corrects itself and you'll know you went the wrong way. In James' pragmatism and in medicine, there are situations in which we have to begin to act before we can even begin to know. I love rock climbing. These are some pictures from some trips. So I'll illustrate this idea of turning attention with an image that James uses, that of an alpine climber. Our alpine climber friend has worked herself into a terrible position where she's stuck on a ledge and the only way out is a terrible leap. She could focus all her attention on the uncertainty, the fact she's not guaranteed to make the jump, the doubt in her ability. In James' words, hesitate so long that at last, all unstrung and trembling, she launches herself in a moment of despair and rolls into the abyss. So a little dramatic, but you get the point. She could also turn her attention to the leap, focus on the things she needs to do to make the jump, steadying her feet, acting as though she can do it, and committing to the jump. She takes a risk of faith and leaps without the guarantee that she'll make it, or it will turn out as she hopes. And actually, James says we're making this jump all the time. It's just there's some situations in life when we're forced to face it. A friend came to me recently because his father was dying from cancer, and he didn't know how long his father had left to live. Days, weeks, months. We sat together and I listened for a while. And then what we talked about were the tasks of dying. We don't know how long your father has, but we do know that there are important tasks to be accomplished in this time. Dying is important work, and there are important things to do. Saying, I love you, I'm sorry, I forgive you, thank you, and goodbye. In the uncertainties of prognosis, I helped my friend find his tasks. And this pragmatic attitude can be so helpful for our patients and for ourselves because it substitutes teasing apart the cloud of the unknown with something we can actually do and make a meaningful difference in. There's a beautiful quote by the father of modern medicine, William Osler, and it expresses the attitude of pragmatism really well. He says, our task is not to see what lies dimly at a distance, but to do what lies clearly at hand. And sometimes in palliative care, the task at hand, the thing to do next, paradoxically, is not to focus on the doing at all. I worked with a palliative care physician who used to be in the military. And he said that in the military, the motto was, don't just stand there, do something. But in palliative care, it's, don't just do something, stand there. Be present with the patient and their family. I love this quote, but in some ways I disagree with it. I think being present with our patients is doing something. And perhaps it's doing one of the most important things we can do for our patients at the end of life. This promise of abandonment is the ultimate turn to action in uncertainty. We may not know what the prognostic future will hold, but even in the most uncertain of circumstances, we do know what we can do next. We can hold the uncertainty with our patients and walk alongside them. And this is something I find so helpful in James. Relationships are central to his philosophy. Things exist in relation. And one thing we know from palliative care is that relationships themselves are part of the healing. Yes, uncertainty causes tremendous suffering, especially when unrealistic expectations and feigned certainty creates distrust. But in the face of the incurable and unanswerable, as we step into the uncertainty with our patients, the uncertainty actually becomes an opportunity for relationship and healing connection. Uncertainty can be part of the suffering, but it can be part of the healing too. We may not be able to offer our patients the certainty of answers, but we can promise to be with them. And even being with them isn't a weight that we have to carry ourselves, but that too we hold with a whole community. I started by showing a video of Michigan Answers, and I have another video to show you. It's an advertisement for the Milford Care Centre, a community hospice program in Ireland. And it offers an answer to uncertainty that's quite different than Michigan Answers. So Bill United shows clearly that we aren't just individuals bravely acting in uncertainty alone, but we're held in community. We carry uncertainty together. All right, physicians are pragmatic. You may be asking, how am I meant to use this? Let's go back to palliating uncertainty. We've got biomedical interventions focused on reducing uncertainty, psychosocial interventions focused on the person and alleviating the effects of uncertainty. And ultimately, there's being with the patient and non-abandonment. In medicine, our default is to focus on the uncertainty, target biomedical interventions, and treat everything else as a consolation prize when we don't have anything biomedical to offer. But alleviating suffering and being with our patients aren't just consolation prizes. They're something we should be doing all the time. And actually, biomedical interventions can become ways of alleviating the suffering of uncertainty. And both boxes can become ways of being with a patient. So palliating uncertainty, it's a shift in attention, turning attention from the uncertainty and to the person, what we can actually do to care for them. In practice, it might look like saying, here is what we don't know. Here is what we can do. And I and my team will be with you through this. After all, accepting that there are things we cannot fix and staying alongside our patients is the very heart of palliative care. So wrapping up, key point in James' philosophy is that how people deal with uncertainty is largely a matter of personality and temperament. Here's the thing I want to point out though. By and large, the person who's drawn to the field of palliative care tends to be the type who doesn't have an incurable urge to fix, who's okay with leaving things unresolved, who can sit with the tension of the unknowns, and who can find joy in being alongside people in their darkest moments. I'm naming what you already do. You already are experts on living with uncertainty. And we know that uncertainty is okay. And we know from our patients that even in uncertainty, life can be lived fully, meaningfully, and joyfully. Palliative care can help lead the way in transforming how uncertainty is approached in medicine on the whole. Together, we can palliate uncertainty, alleviate the suffering of it, and standing alongside one another as we help people live courageously with it. So thank you.
Wow. Ariel, thank you. There's so much to take in there and so much to reflect on. Thank you for the work that you're doing, and we wish you every success in your PhD studies and for what you're sharing with your palliative care community. Thank you. Thank you. We've thought a little bit about the literature with Matt. We've thought a little bit about the practicalities of palliating uncertainty with Ariel. And now Dr. Robert Twycross is going to lead us into thinking about the uncertainties that we're facing currently in relation to potential legal changes. I'm going to ask Kate Flemming. Kate, will you introduce Robert? I think you've got a connection there.
We have. Thank you very much, Max. And I'm absolutely delighted to be able to introduce Dr. Robert Twycross to you all today. I'm sure he's known to very many of you on the call anyhow. I first met Robert over 30 years ago, which is a bit scary to think it's that long ago, Robert, when I was a staff nurse at Sobel House Hospice in Oxford and had a real interest in research. I was doing a master's degree at the time, and Robert kind of I think I caught Robert's attention with my interest in research, and here's the reason that I went into palliative care research. So it's a real privilege today, Robert, to be introducing you. So I'm going to hand over to you now. Robert Twycross, retired consultant in palliative medicine from Oxford, and also emeritus reader at the University of Oxford. So Robert, over to you.
Thank you, Kate, very much. I hope you can see and hear me. But here we are. My subject is assisted dying, and I'm here today because of a paper published on the 13th of April. and that is open access. You've got to read it, because I'm not going to tell you all about it. I'm just going to point you to it. It's your weekend work. And it's very important that you do read it. Now, I wrote it over the winter mainly, and you can see that it's focused on England, or rather England and Wales. But of course, the situation has changed. Even before this was published, I was, waiting for it to be published. And then what happened? Next slide, please. Yeah, I'll just do the definition quickly. This is the one used by the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology, much abbreviated, but you'll understand. You've got two varieties of assisted dying. The first is what we're concentrating on today, and the second is what we commonly call euthanasia. Next. Now, even as I was waiting for my paper to go online, this happened. I learnt on Good Friday that the Scottish bill for assisted dying had been tabled the day before. So it was all in the papers on Good Friday. And Liam MacArthur, one of the SNP members of the Scottish Parliament, is quoted as saying this on the BBC, and I'll come back to that. But so that, interrupted or made me expand from just England and Wales to something wider. Next. But I was quite alarmed by what I read on Good Friday, and I wrote to The Guardian. It was too long, it was never published, but this is what I concluded. I don't think I say it quite so coherently in just a few lines in the paper, but this is it. Based on published data, any form of AD will have collateral harmful consequences, and a lack of readily available quality palliative care will always be coercive. There'll always be abuse. The boundaries of the law will always be stretched, and a wrong prognosis will mean that some people will die unnecessarily. Now, you go back to my paper and look up the references. There's no doubt that those are verifiable assertions. So let's go on. Next. And then I've had a lot of correspondence since the paper was published on the 13th of April. And just a while ago, a week ago, in fact, someone in North America alerted me to this 1.5 hour webinar. And I'm not suggesting you read it, lead it. What do you do with a webinar? Listen to it. But I was particularly interested in the first speaker. Next. Professor Thaddeus Pope. And he started off by saying, people already have options to end their life. Advanced directives to limit treatment, stopping treatment, escalating opioids, continuous deep sedation until death, voluntary cessation of eating and drinking. And now next, they have an extra option, increasingly. Medical aid in dying is what they call it here. It originates, the term, in Canada, as you know, and it's actually medical assistance in dying, but most people corrupt it to medical aid in dying. And there we had it. You go from an advanced directive stopping treatment, and you just go through, and then you have MAID as the sixth option, and what are we going to do about it, and so on. And it's just assumed that it's going to happen. It's just assumed. And there are some basic questions which don't seem to be asked. Well, they weren't asked on this webinar, and they weren't asked, in fact, on one by Hospice UK last week. So next slide. So, hey, wait a moment. What are the views of palliative care doctors in this country? Now, this refers to a survey in 2019, but there have been others since, and the figures are all roughly the same. And no one in this webinar in Minnesota or the webinar from Hospice UK last week said, well, what do palliative medicine doctors think? And why do they think? Why are roughly 85% of palliative medicine doctors against a change in the law? Why would roughly 85% refuse to participate? These questions are not at the forefront. Have you seen it in the media recently? No, the refuseniks are, obscurantists, and they can just be ignored. But of course, most people assume that it's the doctors who are going to do the deed. And indeed, if you read the Scottish provisional law, it says they expect the patient's general practitioner to be the person who helps the patient in relation to the assisted suicide. So, have we got the data? What do the nurses think? What do other people think? What, has Hospice UK done a survey of all the people working in hospice? Now, it may be that the high number against in the medical group is not so high in others. If so, why not? These things need to be looked at and need to be highlighted, and they need to be highlighted to our politicians. Now, a week after the release of the Scottish bill, there was a short paper in the BMJ. For some reason, my glasses won't work today. But it was Charles Warlow, he's a retired neurologist in Edinburgh, and he wrote a piece saying, a new bill could legalise assisted dying in Scotland. And he goes on to say, will the Scottish Parliament have the guts to pass it? Or, quote, or will they hold back sheepishly like last time, under pressure from a minority of well-meaning opponents? Now, I think that's, I can't believe that a retired medic would, use such language. Has he not looked into why doctors are against? Has he not looked into the reasons that it didn't pass in Scotland in the past? And indeed, it didn't pass in England on numerous occasions, including the Maris Law in 2015. Next. And here we are. The overriding consideration. It's not out there up front. The overriding consideration in changing the law must be that more people should benefit from a change in the law than harmed. And in relation to assisted dying, this may not be possible. And I go back to what Matt was saying earlier. Personal autonomy has to be balanced against public safety. And the activists for assisted dying say, oh, if you get the, if you get the eligibility criteria correct, if you have this and you have that, then it'll be all right. It'll be all right. But next, the Danish Ethics Council last year was asked to update their advice from 2010 on an assisted dying law in Denmark. And they concluded that the only thing that will be able to protect the lives and respect of those who are most vulnerable in society will be an unexceptional ban. There is too great a risk that assisted dying will become an expectation aimed at certain groups in society. Read it. Well, actually, it's 90 pages long. It's all in Danish. But even if you find an English translation, it's hard work, but it's well worth the effort. And I would quote this time and time again. The only thing that will be able to protect the lives of those who are most vulnerable will be an unexceptional ban. Next. So the very existence of an offer of assisted dying will decisively change ideas about old age, infirmity, dying, and quality of life. And then next, some of you will be familiar with this article in one of the national newspapers, and he's not the only one who suggested it might be a good thing, you know, if old people should be bumped off to save society the cost of looking after them. It caused a big reaction, but I think it demonstrates what the Danish Ethics Council was saying. You do this and you change attitudes in society. And if you look up humanists against assisted suicide, if you look up the website of Humanists Against Assisted Suicide and Euthanasia, you will find a vigorous piece pointing out exactly what we're seeing here. Thank you, Matt, for finding a translation. Now, next. In my article, I talk about disinformation. And I think it's terrible that in Oregon, it was called the Death with Dignity Act. And it's terrible that the activists for assisted dying have been allowed to get away with dignity in dying, because it means that people now imagine that anything else, anything other than assisted dying, will be extremely distressing and undignified. So how do we deal with disinformation? I'm not sure. Next. So I've gone back to this slide. Do you see what Liam MacArthur says, or is said to have said, when reported on BBC Scotland? And lots of people say, we're modelling it on Oregon, tried and tested. But the last sentence is not true. Eligibility criteria have changed since becoming law in 1997. There was a residency eligibility criterion. You had to be a resident in Oregon. That has gone. And originally, you had to have an expected prognosis of less than 6 months, but that has gone. Now, that worries me. If what is reported here is what he said, you know, how much disinformation is getting out there because the activists are inaccurate in what they say. Next. Now, this is essential reading, easy for the doctors, because most of you will be members of the British Medical Association, but I hope you will find a doctor friend to help you look at it. But the top reference is to the main BMA website, and you'll see the /PAD, physician-assisted dying. And then, as a sort of introduction to that, the monthly newsletter we get from the BMA, this came on the 2nd of February, Andy Green, the Deputy Chair of the Ethics Committee at BMA, he has a very interesting blog, but they say the same thing, obviously, and the website was updated roughly at the end of January. Next. This is the BMA. The way in which any future assisted dying service would be delivered would have a very significant impact on doctors. For that reason, if the law were to change, the BMA would want to see assisted dying as a separate service. In the BMA's view, assisted dying should be set up as a separate service. And that, the more you look at it, the more you look at the evidence in the literature of unconscious bias, of this and that, you'll see that if it's delivered within the health service, it's going to definitely cause more harm than good. So the BMA, that's its view. It needs to be set up as a separate service. You should know that, and we must think about ways in which we should get that message across to our MPs and people like that. Next. Now, at the beginning of the paper, I say you've got 3 ways of approaching the debate. You can just go with the flow of public opinion, which, because of the media coverage, is in favor of assisted dying overall. And then you can be an equally active campaigner against any form of assisted dying, or the third option, which is what I recommend, is active involvement in the debate, seeking to influence legislation. And that's what the BMA says. If you look at what happened in Canada, where the palliative care people stood back and said, we're having none of it, they've ended up with a big mess. Next. So I've written a memo to myself, and these are the 5 headings in it. First, assisted dying will cause more suffering. Okay. Surely you know, as I know, that there are people who refuse referral to hospital palliative care because they think they're going to be done away with morphine or something like that. And despite the fact they're suffering, they refuse to be referred. And that is in the absence of an assisted dying law. What's going to happen when there is an assisted dying law? More suffering. And then, of course, almost certainly the majority of people within a hospice team, I'm going beyond doctors, there will be discord. There'll be those who are pro, but the majority will be against. So that is going to disrupt hospice, palliative care. People will leave because they can't cope with the discord. Now, third reason, I believe there needs to be a sanctuary for dying patients, an assisted dying free zone. And that's because assisted dying and hospice are different philosophies. And this next, please. In palliative care, I think, Ariel, you've already mentioned this, there is a commitment to continuity of care and non-abandonment. Whatever happens, we'll stay beside you all the way. You are still and always will be a person of worth. And that is diametrically opposed to assisted dying, which says at some stage, okay, we agree. You're no longer a person of sufficient worth for us to want to save you from assisted dying. So, and this, of course, comes from a paper of Swiss palliative care and hospice doctors who said the two philosophies are diametrically opposed. And I think we should emphasize that. Okay, people will say, well, oh, we have compassion, you have compassion, etc., etc., etc. But when you get down to the nitty-gritty, they're diametrically opposed. Next. And death is a transition. The reference at the bottom is just one way of getting into the literature. I am not quoting from it. This is what I've put together for simplicity. I think in hospice, we have missed out on talking about death as a transition. And there's a vast amount of information out there justifying this position. Or as Shakespeare might have said, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. And I would suggest that working with the dying typically results in a sense of awe, of mystery, and humility. But we seem to be trapped as a society in what we can call materialistic reductionism. What you see is all there is. And it ignores the otherworldly experiences commonly witnessed in the dying. So, do you know about those? If you're a nurse, you should. Others probably. But go to this paper in Omega and then go to the various references and follow this through. And I think we should be teaching about it more. We should get away from unscientific materialistic reductionism to include all the evidence which is out there that death is a transition, that death is not the end of a person's being. Next. So, staying with Switzerland, it's very interesting. The update of their advice on care of the dying, which includes a bit on assisted suicide, they say this, and in the home of Dignitas, I think it's very good to hear this loud and clear. The true role of physicians in the management of dying and death involves relieving symptoms and supporting the patient. Their responsibilities do not include offering assisted suicide, nor are they obliged to perform it. Assisted suicide is not a medical action to which patients could claim to be entitled, even if it is a legally permissible activity. Next. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Robert. Like Ariel, you've given us a great deal to think about, as usual, with your evidence and your papers and your thought through lack of fluff. Lots to think about. And I'm sure there's many people in the Echo today who might like to respond to what you said. Some maybe very positive about what you've been saying, some not so positive. Please put your comments into the chat so that we can get some idea of the response to what Dr. Twycross has been saying. Thank you very much indeed. We're going to move on as time is against us. Chris, you're there from Hospice UK. Going to have a little bit of a chat to us about this week. Something's happening this week, Chris, I understand.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, there's a little thing called Dying Matters Awareness Week. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of it, but it's so I've been working on it like every day for the last sort of 6 months. It's a national campaign run by Hospice UK, and this week is the culmination of a lot of our efforts. It's when we really ramp up all of the content and all of the messaging, and it's a space and a time for communities around the UK to get together and try and break down the stigma and taboo of talking about death and dying. So I'm really happy and proud and pleased to be here talking to you and telling you a bit more about it. So let's crack on, and I'll tell you what's going on. This year's theme is the way we talk about dying matters, and it's really a kind of exploration into how language is and can be so important at the end of someone's life, and to their families and friends, the people they're close to as well. So language is a very organic theme for this year's Dying Matters Awareness Week, and it's certainly proved a very popular one so far with the people that are getting involved in the campaign. So to underpin the theme, we did some polling at the start of the year. We polled 1,000 recently bereaved people for insights into how they felt that language was used when their loved one was dying. And specifically, we were interested in conversations on the language used between healthcare professionals and their families. The aim of the campaign this year really is we want to help people feel more confident to talk about dying. Just move on. When we got the polling back, I was expecting something that was a sort of like, earth-shattering results of, oh my goodness. Actually, it wasn't. It's a bit more nuanced than that. But there were some really interesting bits and pieces. And I'm going to take you through a few of the questions which we've got results to. But yeah, just to sort of emphasize that the aim was to provide conversation starters and not in any way criticize healthcare professionals. Next slide, please. So one of the questions was, did healthcare professionals clearly tell them that their loved one was likely to die? Click, and the results should come up. So 41% of people said they were very clear that their loved one was going to die. 35% said that they were somewhat clear, and 11% said that they were not clear at all. Next slide, please. Another question was, what language would they prefer healthcare professionals to use to talk about terminal diagnoses and dying? 33% of people said that they'd prefer euphemistic language like passing on or gone to a better place. 45% of people said that they prefer direct language like dying or died. And I thought there was another one. 21% said that they were unsure or they had no preference. Next slide, please. Another question we asked was, how well did healthcare professionals interact with them during the final period of their loved one's life? 62% of people said that they thought healthcare professionals interacted very well or quite well. 21% of people said that they felt the communication was average. And lastly, 10% said it was quite poor or very poor. Next. Oh, yeah. So we did work with a palliative medicine consultant and Hospice UK research and information colleagues to develop our insights and reflections to support the language theme. So it wasn't just all marketing staff like me running away with it. So what we did this year is pretty much what we've done, an extension of what we've done for previous years. So we produced lots and lots and lots of resources to really try and get people set up in the best possible way to have those conversations and to hold events and to do their own Dying Matters Awareness Week campaigns on their own sort of social media channels and various networks. So the resources that we produce in preparation for the campaign included a full supporter pack in English and Welsh, a libraries pack, also in English and Welsh, conversation starter cards, which people can print out and use at their events, using some of these statistics, really trying to get people to guess and sort of reflect on what they think and their own sort of surprises when they go through their stats. There were some social graphics, press release, campaign image selection. They can print out some bunting and some posters to have at their event. Again, we set up a What's on Events listing page, so we've got I think we've got over 300 community events this year, and we reached 299 last year. So we're just pipping it, I think, which is really, really good. And we are holding a parliamentary event, which is rescheduled from yesterday because there was a train strike. So that's going to be on the 20th of May. I come from a content background, so I was very much keen to lead with some great stories and some great content. With the help of the very good people at North London Hospice, we arranged 3 people to be in our film to sort of give a really nice range of experiences and stories, in which we could root the campaign in. You'll see pictures of them on the top right hand corner there. On the left, we have Patricia, who's living with an incurable illness. We have Mumtaz in the middle, whose husband Rashik was cared for by North London Hospice and died in 2021. And then on the right is Dr. Lucy Payne, who is our palliative medicine consultant and has been extremely helpful this year in giving us her insights and reflections for lots of various bits and pieces of content. And we turn their interviews into a beautiful animation. I will share the link with you, Max. You might send that around to people. But if you want to look at it, it's on the Dying Matters Instagram, Twitter, Facebook pages, and the Hospice UK LinkedIn page. It's a really, really nice animated film, and something a little bit different to the kind of sort of standard vox pops that you might expect to see for a charity campaign. We also leverage that content into lots of different supporting content. So we use the audio interviews we did to make podcast style videos, which people can share, and we can put our own social media. We turn them into lots of different web stories and tips articles and advice. We turn them into media pitches. We developed a Talking Matters quiz, which is essentially the conversation starter cards, but in a little 6-question online quiz that people can take. Little fun engagement for that. And we also asked our members of Hospice UK to pitch in and provide some thanks for showing the film. We asked our hospice members to pitch in and provide some tips that we could edit together on how to talk about death and dying. And we've got maybe 4 or 5 of those with quite a nice range of hospices contributing to that. So lots and lots of content for Dying Matters Awareness Week, lots and lots of stuff that people can share, and really nice to see lots and lots of engagement as well. Next slide, please. If you'd like to help, if you'd like to get involved with the Dying Matters Awareness Week campaign, it's running until this Sunday, the 12th of May. Really, it's all about watching the film, watching the animation, and if you'd like to comment, share, engage with any of the Dying Matters launch social posts, which do feature the animation, then that would be really, really helpful. And yeah, please do post about Dying Matters Awareness Week. It's a space for everybody to talk about death and dying. It doesn't have to be about language. It can just be literally about something connected to death and dying and just breaking that stigma and taboo. Please use the hashtag so that we can give you some love, or tag Dying Matters, and we'll be really, really grateful for all of your support. That's just a really brief overview of the campaign in a nutshell. Hope that's really helpful, and if you've got any questions, then please do let me know.
Chris, thank you very much indeed, and thank you for all the work over these past months. A lot of work there to create ammunition for the palliative care community to use to promote and to encourage engagement. Thank you so much. I think the link to that animation is now in the chat box, so please copy that down and have a look at it. Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Just a few things to finish before one important thing in our resources update. We'd like to announce the coming of a volunteer to career program. It's a really exciting program. It's all about recognizing that our workforce, there's major gaps in our workforce, and this is a program aimed at seeing, are there members of our volunteer community who would be willing to step up and receive training to actually then become paid employees within our services? It's being funded by the Rank Foundation. If you're interested, if your hospice is interested in it, you can sign up for a webinar here. It's going to be on between 11 and 12 next Wednesday to a bit more information about it. And then if you're actually interested in applying and becoming one of the pilot hospices involved in this, the application deadline is the 7th of June. So if you take a snapshot of this QR code, that we think is, a really interesting kind of a problem solution. Matt, you're going to tell us something about Toby.
Oh, well, I'm going to just say the Hospice UK have been in with Toby Porter in Westminster and outlining very clearly the massive deficit of 77 million accumulative across the hospice sector. He put a good case forward in terms of a sustainable, equitable funding model in the hospice inquiry, a new inquiry following on from the assisted dying, assisted suicide inquiry, which recommended more hospice funding. So that's really good news, I guess. The parliamentarians are hearing this. I also wanted to really highlight this particular paper, moving on really quickly, but this is worth reading or doing a journal club about. This is devastating. This is the number of bodies found decomposing by themselves within England and Wales. It is increasing by about 3.5 times. This is people who are lonely, alone, and died, and we don't know for a number of days. I think this is something we should, as a whole community, should really look at. I find this hard to read. Sorry, Max. Next slide. To highlight a few different bits here, AI stuff. Excellent work by Dr. Nuoso. Please have a look at those links of things AI being used within our sphere of cancer patients in terms of writing their advanced care planning. AI is beginning to be used within our own sector. Thanks, Max.
Have a look at the Marie Curie blog there.
Yes.
It's really worth having a look at.
Yeah.
FamCare, Matt?
Oh, please. So here it's open. The email's at the bottom. Email the APM office if you want to be involved in FamCare. It's very, very good. It's the same thing as last year. No change in costs. You all know about it.
And the APPM clinical guidelines now available for pediatric palliative care, first edition, covering several really important sections. Excellent quality, really well put together. If you're involved in pediatric palliative care, it's a really good resource. Also want to let you know some of your organizations, adult organizations, have been involved in Supportive Care UK. I know my service is really indebted to the support that we receive from Supportive Care UK. They are now providing a service for pediatric hospices and pediatric palliative care services. 5 of the current 15 pediatric palliative medicine consultants are in there supporting the leveraging of pediatric palliative care specialism across the sector. So it might be something that could help keep your service going. And just following on from Chris's report on the UK, this is an Irish report, again, looking at 4,000 people across Ireland and the response review of deaths from people who have witnessed those deaths and been through bereavement. Ireland scores a little bit higher than England, about 80% of real satisfaction, but worth having a look at. One final thing, you may know, I've been involved in the PANG guidelines for many years. We're not continuing on with that unless There's some people out there with real enthusiasm, but one of the areas of it has been the website area, which Ian Back has put together, which allows you to check on opioid doses, allowed you to check on compatibility. We would love to be able to maintain and keep this going, but do people find it valuable? Are people using it? If they are, could you just pop that into the chat box? Really good to know. And would there be anybody out there who'd be prepared to host it? We've got the pharmacy support, we've got the IT support, but we just need a secure website where it could be, and the palliative care family could access it. Kate, we have gone to 5 o'clock. What's been happening in the chat box? Please tolerate us if we take another 10 minutes of your lives. Sorry.
Yeah, no, thanks, Max. And I think the theme running through, particularly from Ariel's and Robert's talks, are actually the use of language and how we have these conversations, and the challenges as a sector as to how to start to have meaningful conversations about how we start to engage with this debate around assisted dying, and rather than kind of take an opposition, that kind of challenge, I think, that Robert gave to us. So actually, how do we have the conversations? And actually, Matt's saying, language does matter. It can be misused, and also almost that we've lost the ownership of dignity in palliative care, and how does that feel, and what's the implications of that? Mark Hazelwood, thank you for highlighting both that it's, I've just lost my slide there, Demystifying Death Week in Scotland this week, and also about the policy memorandum accompanying the draft bill in Scotland assumes implicitly that will generally be GPs in the NHS who carry out assisted dying activities, but there's no, interestingly, there's no organisational arrangements detailed within it, i.e. there's a right but no corresponding duty to provide. Sarah Holmes has highlighted a book by Madeline Bunting called Labours of Love, and which I would also thoroughly recommend. I had the privilege of interviewing Madeline Bunting on that book at York Festival of Ideas a few years ago, and actually she talks about the labour of love, the labour of caring, and how pain can be borne with dignity. Yeah, would totally sort of support Sarah's recommendation for that book as well. And Rahul Arora, thank you. It's erroneous to assume that existential distress and suffering might constitute viable indications for assisting dying when people have got access to good palliative care. I guess the challenge is where that access isn't there, which has been so much part of the debate as well. So that's my summary so far, and a few more bits have come in while I was just chatting there. People using the PAN guidelines.
All right, PAN guideline, they are using them? They continue to use them? Excellent. We printed 250,000 over the 4 editions. We had to try to undercut Robert's book, make it cheaper and more available. I just see Claude's just shared, thanks Claude Ragnar, an evidence website on assisted dying there as well, one I wasn't previously familiar with, so thank you. It's an excellent website with really good evidence, good clear. It's a really good resource. No matter what your position, it's really, we need to have evidence to make this informed.
One more, Max. Elora's highlighted, and sorry, Elora, I had noted that down in a different place as we went along. On BBC One, on the 14th of May at 9 p.m, Liz Carr has got a programme, a film called Better Off Dead. Don't know, many people will be familiar with Liz Carr, who's a disabled campaigner and is speaking quite, and I read a review of it, so she speaks of both sides, so I think highlighting that, so thank you, Laura.
Yeah, but how do we as a specialty keep the space open so that we can continue to look after the 99% of patients for whom this will always be an irrelevance, and we don't get sidetracked or split or divided, and our service to the vast majority be undermined. So thank you very much indeed, everybody. It's been again a whirlwind through uncertainty. We thank you, Matt, for opening up in your own particular style and way, making us think in different ways. Thank you, Kate, for that paper on prisons, and Ariel, yeah, and thank you, Robert, for your concern and your wisdom and your evidence. And thanks, Chris, for reminding us of Dying Matters Week. We've focused a lot today on uncertainty, and much of what our focus on uncertainty has been negative uncertainty. I want to finish with a different spin, a different look at uncertainty, and that's the poem that I'd like to finish with today. It's called Sometimes by Sheena Pugh. Sometimes things don't go, after all, from bad to worse. Some years, muscadel grapes face down frost. Green thrives. The crops don't fail. Sometimes a man aims high and all goes well. A people sometimes will step back from war, elect an honest man, decide they care enough that they can't leave some stranger poor. Some men become what they were born for. Sometimes our best intentions do not go amiss. Sometimes we do as we meant to. The sun will sometimes melt a field of sorrow that seemed hard frozen. May it happen to you.